The autumn rain pelted against the leaded glass of Ravenhurst Manor as Eveline Harcourt gazed out upon the misted moors. 3 years had passed since she had been escorted to this remote estate. 3 years since the Duke of Windermere had looked upon her with those cold hazel eyes and pronounced the words that had shattered her young heart. The marriage has served its purpose. You shall remain here, where your presence will not trouble London society nor myself. She still recalled with painful clarity how she had stood before him, tears streaming down her porcelain cheeks, dignity fracturing like fine china, how her trembling fingers had clutched the small silver music box, her offering of peace on their wedding night, while he had turned from her without a second glance. The Duke had not even permitted the melody to play to completion before closing the lid with a decisive snap that echoed through her memory like the final note of a funeral dirge. "Your Grace," Mrs. Langford's gentle voice broke through Eveline's reverie. The older woman entered the drawing room, her grey-streaked hair neatly tucked beneath her cap, her eyes warm with maternal concern. "Reverend Hale has arrived with news from the village. The floods have damaged the Wilsons' cottage quite severely." Eveline straightened her posture, smoothing the sleeves of her lavender gown. "Please tell him I shall join him momentarily. And have Jenkins prepare the cart with linens and provisions." The passing seasons had transformed the abandoned bride. Where once stood a timid baronet's daughter, now resided the unofficial guardian of the surrounding estates. Her slender hands, once idle with embroidery, now kept meticulous accounts of harvests and repairs. The locals had ceased whispering of the discarded Duchess, and instead spoke with reverence of Our Lady Eveline. In the main hall, Reverend Nathan Hale awaited, his youthful face etched with concern. His humble clerical attire seemed at odds with the elegant surroundings, yet he carried himself with the quiet assurance of a man confident in his purpose. "Lady Windermere," he began, before correcting himself. "Forgive me, Mrs. Harcourt. Either title is but a shadow, Reverend," Eveline replied, a faint smile gracing her lips. "What matters is what we do, not what we are called." Together they rode through the rain-soaked countryside, the wheels of the cart cutting through mud as they approached the humble Wilson cottage. The family stood outside their damaged home, faces drawn with despair. "We've nothing left, milady," Mrs. Wilson sobbed, clutching her youngest child to her breast. Eveline descended from the cart with practiced grace. "Then we shall begin anew," she declared, removing her gloves to better assist. "Your family shall stay at the gatehouse until repairs are complete." The Reverend observed her with undisguised admiration. "You possess a remarkable spirit, Mrs. Harcourt. Many in your position would have surrendered to bitterness." "Bitterness is a luxury I cannot afford, Reverend," she replied softly, as she knelt in the mud to comfort a whimpering child, heedless of her fine gown. "These people depend upon me." Hours later, as twilight descended upon Ravenhurst, Eveline sat alone in her chambers. She unfolded a letter recently arrived from her childhood friend, Clara Ashcombe, now a widow and successful author. "Dearest Eveline," Clara had written in her bold hand, "London buzzes with curious news. Your husband has returned from India, gravely ill and much altered. Lady Octavia spreads vicious rumors that you live in scandalous independence, perhaps even with improper attachment to a certain clergyman. I fear trouble brews. Guard yourself, dear friend." Eveline's hands trembled. Alaric Rowanford, Duke of Windermere, returned from India. The man who had vowed never to look upon her again. She pressed her fingers against her temples, struggling to maintain her composure. A sudden thunderclap shook the windows, followed by the distant sound of carriage wheels on gravel. Mrs. Langford burst into the room without ceremony, her face ashen. "Your Grace," she gasped, "the carriage has arrived. It bears the Windermere crest." Eveline rose slowly, her heartbeat quickening like a trapped bird. "Who has come, Mrs. Langford?" "Surely not. His Grace himself, madam. The Duke is here, unconscious with fever, carried by his servants. They beg sanctuary, saying he has journeyed without rest, insisting that he must reach you." The silver music box on Eveline's dressing table seemed to gleam in the candlelight, a silent witness to this unexpected turn of fate. "Prepare the blue chamber," Eveline commanded, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil, "and send for the doctor immediately." As she moved toward the doorway, the butler appeared, bearing a sealed letter upon a silver tray. "Found in his Grace's coat pocket, madam." He was clutching it most desperately. The seal was broken, the wax crumbled. Eveline unfolded the parchment with trembling fingers. The handwriting was unsteady, nothing like the Duke's usual precise script, yet unmistakably his. The single line written there caused her breath to catch. "I have wronged the only innocent heart I have ever known." The blue chamber, once prepared for visiting dignitaries, now housed the fevered form of Alaric Rowanford, Duke of Windermere. Candles guttered in their sconces as the physician concluded his examination, his weathered face grave beneath his spectacles. Beyond the draped windows, thunder rumbled across the Yorkshire moors like distant cannons, echoing the tumult in Eveline's breast. "The fever has a powerful hold, Mrs. Harcourt," Dr. Blackwood murmured, replacing instruments in his leather case. "His Grace appears to have travelled despite his condition, a most ill-advised journey from London in his state." Eveline stood at the threshold, unwilling to approach the bed where the man who had banished her now lay unconscious. How altered he appeared! The Duke's proud countenance was hollowed by illness, his commanding presence diminished to this vulnerable form. His dark hair, once immaculately groomed, lay damp against his forehead. His skin, once burnished by Indian sun, now held the pallor of alabaster. "Will he recover?" she inquired, her voice carefully neutral. "With proper care, perhaps. The next 3 days shall determine his fate." The physician hesitated. "He requires constant attendance. I can send a nurse from the village." "That will not be necessary," Eveline interrupted, surprising herself. "Mrs. Langford and I shall attend to him." When the doctor departed, Eveline approached the bedside with measured steps. She gazed upon the sleeping face of her husband, a stranger who had once, with a few cold words, altered the course of her existence. "What brings you to my door after 3 years of silence, Your Grace?" she whispered. "What confession drives a proud duke across England in such a state?" As if in response, Alaric stirred, his cracked lips forming incoherent words. Eveline leaned closer, against her better judgment. "Arabella," he murmured, anguish twisting his features. "Forgive me, I could not save you." Eveline withdrew sharply. Arabella, a name she had heard whispered by servants when she first arrived at Windermere Hall as a bride, a ghost that had haunted the periphery of her brief marriage. Mrs. Langford entered quietly, bearing a basin of cool water and linen cloths. Her eyes, wise with years of service, met Eveline's questioning gaze. "You know of this Arabella?" Eveline asked softly. The older woman hesitated, her hands stilling over the basin. "It is not my place to speak of such matters, madam." "I believe it is precisely your place, Mrs. Langford. I am mistress of Ravenhurst, if nothing else. And that man," she nodded toward the bed, "cast me away without explanation. I believe I am entitled to truth, however bitter." Mrs. Langford sighed, settling the basin on the bedside table. Arabella Wynne was the daughter of Earl Wynne. She and his Grace were inseparable in their youth. It was assumed they would marry. Then came the scandal. "What scandal?" Eveline prompted when the woman fell silent. "She took her own life, madam, the night before her wedding to another. They say his Grace found her body." Mrs. Langford's voice dropped to a whisper. It changed him utterly. He became cold, remote. When his father died and he inherited the title, he declared he would marry only for duty, never for sentiment. Eveline turned away, pressing her fingertips against the window pane. The glass felt cool against her skin, grounding her in reality as her mind reeled with revelation. "So I was merely a duty," she murmured, "a transaction to secure the bloodline. You were innocent of his pain, madam. That is your only crime." Through the darkness and rain, Eveline discerned a solitary rider approaching the manor. The figure moved with urgency despite the tempest, and within minutes Jenkins announced a visitor. "Reverend Hale begs a moment of your time, madam. He claims the matter is most urgent." The young clergyman entered, his cloak dripping puddles onto the Persian carpet. His normally composed features were troubled, his eyes darting nervously to the figure on the bed before fixing on Eveline. "Forgive the intrusion at this hour, Mrs. Harcourt," he began, "but a most disturbing letter has reached me from London. It appears Lady Octavia Rowanford, the Duke's aunt, has been circulating rumours of impropriety between us." Eveline's cheeks burned with indignation. "What manner of impropriety?" "The vilest kind, madam. She insinuates that you," he faltered, too gentlemanly to voice the slander, "that I live as a libertine with my spiritual adviser." Eveline finished for him, her voice hardening. "How convenient a tale to justify my banishment." "There is more," Nathan continued reluctantly. "Lady Octavia has announced a grand assembly at Windermere Hall 3 days hence. She intends, I am told, to formally request that the church investigate our moral standing and potentially strip me of my parish." Eveline's mind raced. The timing could hardly be coincidence, the Duke arriving unconscious at her door, just as his aunt moved to destroy what little dignity Eveline had salvaged from the wreckage of her marriage. "Your reputation shall not suffer for my sake, Reverend," she declared. "I shall—" A hoarse voice from the bed interrupted her. "You shall attend the assembly as Duchess of Windermere." Eveline and Nathan turned in unison. Alaric Rowanford had risen to his elbows, his hazel eyes burning with fever, yet suddenly lucid and fixed upon his wife. I have crossed England to make amends. He rasped, each word an effort. I shall not permit her to besmirch your name further. The Duke's hand trembled as he extended it toward Eveline, but before she could respond, his strength failed him. He collapsed back against the pillows, unconscious once more. The music box on the distant dressing table remained silent, its melody locked within, awaiting the key that would release it. Dawn broke over Ravenhurst Manor in tentative stripes of amber and rose, as if uncertain of its welcome after such a turbulent night. In the blue chamber, Alaric Rowanford lay still upon the bed, his breathing more regulated than before, though fever still claimed his senses. Eveline sat beside him, her posture rigid despite the hours of vigil, her fingers methodically wringing excess water from linen cloths before applying them to his burning forehead. With each compress, her mind returned to his words from the previous evening. What amends could possibly repair 3 years of silence and abandonment? What right had he to appear now, when she had finally constructed a life from the ruins he had left her? "You are angry," came his voice, startling her from her reverie. His eyes were open now, clearer than before, though shadows still ringed them like bruises. Eveline withdrew her hand. "You are more lucid this morning, Your Grace. You did not answer my observation. I was not aware a question had been posed." She folded her hands in her lap, maintaining a careful distance. "Your fever has broken, though you remain weak. The physician advises complete rest." Alaric studied her face with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. How different he seemed from the cold aristocrat who had dismissed her. 3 years in India had weathered his once immaculate features. New lines framed his eyes, not merely from illness, but from some profound inner transformation. "You have changed," he murmured. "As have you," she replied evenly, "though I cannot speak to the nature of your transformation, having been absent from your life by your own decree." A flash of pain crossed his features, not physical discomfort, but something deeper. He attempted to rise, only to fall back with a grimace. "Eveline, Mrs. Harcourt, if you please," she corrected him, "or Lady Windermere, if formality must be observed, but not Eveline." That familiarity was never earned. His jaw tightened, but he nodded, accepting the rebuke. "Mrs. Harcourt, then I owe you an explanation." "You owe me far more than that, sir, but I shall not collect the debt. Not when you lie fevered in my home." She rose, straightening her skirts. "We shall speak when you are recovered." As she moved to leave, his voice stopped her. "I was a coward." Eveline paused at the doorway, her back still to him. Against her better judgment, she turned. "A coward?" she echoed. "Is that your explanation? A duke with all the power of England's aristocracy behind him claims cowardice?" "Not claims, confesses." His voice was stronger now, though his body remained weak. "I married you for your bloodline, believing myself incapable of sentiment. Then I glimpsed something in you, a light, a goodness that I knew would eventually demand more than I could give." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "So you banished me before I could discover your emotional deficiencies. How considerate, Your Grace." "No." He closed his eyes briefly. "I banished you because I saw in you the ghost of another woman, one whose death I could not prevent. I feared history repeating itself." "Arabella Wynne," Eveline said softly. Alaric's eyes widened. "How did you—" "Your fever speaks truths your waking mind conceals." She moved back toward the bed, compelled by something stronger than resentment. "Mrs. Langford told me of your loss." A cloud passed over his face. "Then you know I am damaged beyond repair." "I know nothing of the sort," Eveline replied. "I know only that you suffered, and in your suffering, caused me to suffer as well. That is the equation we must reconcile." Before he could respond, a sharp knock preceded the entrance of Jenkins, bearing a silver tray with a letter. "From London, madam. Most urgent according to the writer." Eveline broke the seal, an elegant crest she recognized as belonging to her friend Clara. The hasty scrawl within made her blood run cold. "Lady Octavia has accelerated her plans," she read aloud, forgetting momentarily her audience. "The assembly is tomorrow night, not 3 days hence. She has engaged Lord Benedict Vane to testify against your character. Beware, he has visited Ravenhurst in your absence and claims intimate knowledge of your daily affairs." Alaric struggled to sit upright. "Benedict Vane? My cousin? What business had he at Ravenhurst?" "None whatsoever," Eveline replied, folding the letter with trembling fingers. "I have never received him here." Yet another fabrication to add to Lady Octavia's collection. "You must attend the assembly," Alaric insisted. "We shall face them together." "We?" Eveline arched an eyebrow. "You can scarcely stand, Your Grace. And I have no desire to subject myself to public humiliation at Windermere Hall, a place from which I was explicitly barred by its master." "I was wrong," he said simply, the admission falling like lead between them. grievously, unforgivably wrong. But if you do not appear, Octavia will ensure your reputation is destroyed beyond repair. She has always resented any threat to the family's cold traditions. Eveline moved to the window, gazing out at the estate she had come to love, the tenants she had helped, the land she had nurtured. All could be tainted by vicious rumors from London. "I have built something here," she said quietly, "something honest and worthwhile. Must I risk it all for the sake of a title I never truly held?" "Not for the title," Alaric replied, his voice gaining strength with each word. "For yourself, for the truth, and yes, for those who depend upon you here." A gentle tap at the door heralded Mrs. Langford's entrance. "Reverend Hale has returned, madam, with most disturbing news. It seems representatives from the diocese have arrived in the village, making inquiries about your relationship." Eveline's composure nearly broke. "So it begins," she whispered. "There is more," Mrs. Langford continued reluctantly. "A woman has accompanied them, elegantly dressed, advanced in years. She introduces herself as Lady Octavia Rowanford and requests an immediate audience with you." The silver music box on Eveline's dressing table caught the morning light, its tarnished surface reflecting fractured beams across the chamber wall. Like that box, Eveline realized, her carefully constructed piece was about to be opened, exposing whatever melody, discordant or harmonious, lay within. "Tell her," Eveline said after a moment's reflection, "that the Duchess of Windermere will receive her in the drawing room in precisely 1 hour." The Duke's sharp intake of breath was the only sound that followed her declaration. The drawing room of Ravenhurst Manor, with its faded elegance and provincial furnishings, had never been intended to host a confrontation between two such formidable women. Lady Octavia Rowanford stood by the hearth, her rigid posture a testament to decades of aristocratic discipline. Her silver-streaked hair was arranged in an immaculate coiffure beneath a black lace cap, while her gown of deep burgundy taffeta rustled with each slight movement, as if giving voice to her barely contained disdain. "Mrs. Harcourt," she pronounced, deliberately emphasizing the maiden name. "How quaint your little kingdom appears. One might almost mistake it for respectability." Eveline, seated with perfect composure in a wing-back chair, inclined her head slightly. "Lady Octavia, how unexpected to receive you after 3 years of absolute silence from the Rowanford family. Necessity, not desire, brings me to your door." The older woman's green eyes narrowed as they surveyed the room, lingering pointedly on the modest furnishings. "I understand my nephew has taken ill within these walls. A convenient development, is it not?" "Convenient," Eveline echoed, her voice cool. "I find nothing convenient about a man arriving at my threshold in the grip of fever, particularly one who made his disregard for me abundantly clear upon our parting." Lady Octavia's thin lips curled into a smile devoid of warmth. "How well you play the wounded innocent, my dear. Yet rumors of your pastoral comforts have reached even London drawing rooms. The young Reverend spends a great deal of time at Ravenhurst, does he not? Reverend Hale ministers to all souls in the parish, Lady Octavia, including mine." Eveline maintained her calm, though her heart quickened with indignation. "Is spiritual counsel now to be counted among my supposed transgressions? Do not dissemble, girl. You were sent here in disgrace, yet you have carved out a position of unseemly independence, managing estates, giving orders, receiving gentlemen callers without proper chaperonage." The older woman removed her gloves with deliberate slowness. "Did you truly believe such irregularities would go unremarked upon?" Before Eveline could respond, the door opened to reveal Mrs. Langford, her face a mask of careful neutrality. "The Duke requests Lady Octavia's presence in the Blue Chamber, madam." A flicker of surprise crossed the aristocrat's features. "Alaric is conscious, then?" "Quite conscious, my lady, and most insistent upon speaking with you immediately." Lady Octavia hesitated, glancing between the servant and Eveline. "Very well, lead on." As they departed, Eveline pressed her fingertips to her temples. The confrontation had been merely a prelude, she knew, a skirmish before the true battle at Windermere Hall. She had scarcely a moment to compose her thoughts before Jenkins announced another caller. "Lady Clara Ashcombe, madam." Clara swept into the room like a gust of autumn wind, her copper hair escaping its pins, her travelling cloak askew. Unlike Lady Octavia's calculated movements, Clara's were impulsive and sincere, and she embraced Eveline without ceremony. "My dearest friend," she exclaimed, drawing back to examine Eveline's face. "I came the instant I confirmed the assembly had been moved forward. Octavia's carriage passed mine on the road. That woman moves with the sinuous determination of a serpent." "She is here now," Eveline confirmed, "conversing with the Duke." Clara's eyes widened. "So it's true. He has returned to you." "Not to me," Eveline clarified. "To his conscience, perhaps. He babbles of amends and cowardice, yet I cannot fathom what has precipitated this sudden moral awakening. Men, Clara snorted, removing her gloves with none of Lady Octavia's precision. They believe a grand gesture can erase years of neglect. Still, his appearance has thrown Octavia into disarray. She had not expected him to abandon his post in India. What do you know of her plans? Clara's expression darkened. The assembly is but a stage for public censure. She has gathered testimonies against you, paid for, no doubt, and means to petition the church for an inquiry into your moral conduct. But worse, she intends to have you declared mentally unsound due to female hysteria, thereby granting her control over Ravenhurst as Alaric's closest relative. Eveline paled. She would not dare. She has already begun the proceedings, Clara replied grimly. Benedict Vane has sworn an affidavit claiming you expressed disturbed thoughts during his visit here, a visit that never occurred, I presume. Never, Eveline confirmed, her voice barely audible. The only remedy is to appear at Windermere Hall as the Duchess, with your husband at your side, publicly affirming your position. Clara hesitated. Can he travel? Will he stand with you? He claims that is his purpose in coming, yet his fever barely broke this morning. I cannot trust in his strength, physical or moral. Clara took her friend's hands. Then we shall prepare as if you stand alone, and count his support as fortune if it materializes. I have brought my finest gown for you, midnight blue silk that will transform you into the very image of ducal dignity. A commotion in the corridor interrupted them. The door burst open to reveal Lady Octavia, her face contorted with fury, followed by Mrs. Langford, who appeared torn between propriety and alarm. You, Lady Octavia hissed at Eveline, have bewitched him utterly. Whatever falsehoods you have poured into his fever-addled mind, I assure you, Aunt, came Alaric's voice from the doorway, my mind is perfectly clear. The Duke stood leaning heavily upon a cane, his tall frame diminished by illness, yet carrying an unmistakable air of authority. He had donned a dressing gown over his nightshirt, his hair hastily combed back from his forehead. Despite his weakened state, his eyes blazed with a determination Eveline had never witnessed during their brief marriage. You should be abed, nephew, Lady Octavia snapped. This woman has clearly manipulated your vulnerable condition. Silence. The single word, though quietly spoken, carried such command that even the formidable Lady Octavia faltered. You forget yourself. This woman is the Duchess of Windermere, your social superior, and mistress of the house in which you stand. You will accord her the respect her position demands. Lady Octavia's face flushed with indignation. After 3 years of separation? After you yourself declared the marriage a mere formality? Now you claim her as Duchess? I do. Alaric's knuckles whitened around the head of his cane, and I shall proclaim it before all of society at your assembly tomorrow evening. You are not well enough to travel, Eveline interjected, surprised by the concern in her own voice. His eyes met hers, softening briefly. For this journey, I shall find strength. Lady Octavia's mouth twisted into a cruel smile. Very touching. Yet I wonder if your conviction will remain once I reveal certain documents in my possession, letters that may illuminate why your bride was truly banished to this forgotten corner of Yorkshire. Before anyone could respond, she swept toward the door. Until tomorrow evening, nephew, Mrs. Harcourt. She emphasized the maiden name with deliberate malice. Lady Ashcombe. As the door closed behind her, Alaric's strength seemed to desert him. He staggered slightly, and Clara moved swiftly to assist him to a chair. What letters does she speak of? Eveline asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alaric closed his eyes briefly. I do not know, but Octavia has always excelled at manipulation. She opposed our marriage from the beginning, not because of your lineage, which is impeccable, but because... Because? Clara prompted when he faltered. Because she feared I might find happiness, he admitted, opening his eyes to meet Eveline's gaze, and in doing so, break the pattern of Rowanford marriages, cold, strategic alliances that preserve wealth and title at the expense of the heart. In the silence that followed, the distant sound of carriage wheels marked Lady Octavia's departure. The confrontation had ended, but the true battle lay ahead at Windermere Hall, where Eveline would face not only her husband's aunt, but the ghosts of her own humiliation. The silver music box waited, its melody still trapped within. The journey to Windermere Hall commenced at first light, the carriage wheels cutting through muddy Yorkshire lanes as dawn painted the moors with hesitant gold. Within the conveyance, Clara Ashcombe adjusted the velvet curtains to shield Eveline from curious gazes as they passed through villages. Opposite them, the Duke reclined against cushions, his face ashen despite his insistence upon travelling. You risk your health unnecessarily, Your Grace, Eveline observed, breaking the silence that had stretched between them since departing Ravenhurst. There are greater risks at stake, he replied, his voice low but firm. My aunt has spent years cultivating influence within society. Her accusations against you, however false, will find fertile ground if not confronted directly. Clara's eyes darted between them. I still believe we should have brought the Reverend Hale. His testimony would counter the slander most effectively. His presence would only validate the rumors, Alaric countered. No, this battle must be fought by those with the authority to silence gossip permanently. A duke and his duchess, appearing in unified dignity. We are hardly unified, Eveline murmured, gazing out at the passing landscape. 3 years of separation cannot be mended by a single declaration, however public. The carriage hit a particularly deep rut, jostling its occupants. Alaric winced, his hand instinctively reaching for his side where fever had left him weakened. Eveline found herself moving toward him before conscious thought intervened, her fingers brushing his arm in concern. You see, Clara remarked softly, wounds may heal given proper care. Eveline withdrew her hand as if burned, fixing her gaze once more upon the misted fields. Yet the moment of instinctive tenderness lingered between them, a fragile thread connecting past to present. As the miles unfurled beneath the carriage wheels, Alaric's strength seemed to wane. By midday, when they stopped at a coaching inn to rest the horses, he could scarcely stand without assistance. In the private parlour secured for their refreshment, Clara pulled Eveline aside while the Duke dozed in an armchair. He will not survive this journey, Clara whispered urgently. Look at him. He burns with determination, yes, but his body fails him with each passing hour. Eveline glanced at her husband's sleeping form, noting the shadowed hollows beneath his cheekbones, the laboured rise and fall of his chest. What would you have me do? Turn back to Ravenhurst and surrender to Lady Octavia's machinations? No, Clara replied, her expression thoughtful. But perhaps we might seek closer sanctuary. Is there no allied household between here and Windermere where he might properly recover? A memory stirred in Eveline's mind, a name mentioned in passing during the brief weeks of her marriage. Thornfield Abbey, she said slowly. It belongs to Lord Edward Keswick, who was my husband's companion at Oxford. If I recall correctly, it lies but 10 miles from our current position. Perfect, Clara exclaimed. We shall divert there immediately. Lord Keswick can surely provide proper medical attention and perhaps even escort us to Windermere when the Duke is sufficiently recovered. Alaric stirred, opening his eyes with evident effort. I heard my name, he murmured. What conspiracy do you ladies devise? Eveline approached him, summoning the courage to speak directly. Your Grace, your condition worsens by the hour. We propose a brief respite at Thornfield Abbey before continuing to Windermere. Lord Keswick might... Edward? A faint smile touched the Duke's lips. Yes, he would shelter us. And more importantly, he would stand as witness to my declaration regarding our marriage. His testimony carries significant weight in society. The decision made, they resumed their journey with altered course. As the carriage turned toward Thornfield Abbey, Eveline found herself seated beside the Duke, supporting his weakened frame against the jolting of the uneven road. The unfamiliar proximity stirred confusing emotions, resentment tangled with concern, wounded pride with reluctant compassion. I never opened it, he said suddenly, his voice so low she nearly missed his words. Opened what? She asked, puzzled. The music box you gave me on our wedding night. His hazel eyes, clear despite his weakness, held hers. I could not bear to hear its melody. It reminded me too much of Arabella, Eveline finished for him, the name no longer a mystery, but a shadow between them. He nodded slightly. I believed sentiment to be a weakness, one I had purged from my character after her death. Yet in India, when fever first claimed me, I heard music. Your music box, playing in my dreams, though I had never permitted its tune to reach my ears. Eveline remained silent, unwilling to offer absolution too easily, yet moved despite herself by this glimpse of vulnerability in a man she had known only as cold and distant. I have wronged you, he continued, each word an evident struggle, not merely in sending you away, but in marrying you at all when I was incomplete, damaged. We are all damaged in some fashion, Your Grace. Eveline replied softly. It is what we build from our brokenness that defines us. Their exchange was interrupted as the carriage slowed, turning between imposing stone gates that marked the entrance to Thornfield Abbey. The manor house rose before them, a harmonious blend of medieval solidity and Georgian elegance, smoke curling from multiple chimneys against the afternoon sky. Lord Edward Keswick himself emerged onto the front steps as the carriage halted, his tall figure silhouetted against the great oak door. Handsome in a scholarly fashion, with spectacles perched upon a Roman nose and chestnut hair receding slightly at the temples, he exhibited genuine shock at the sight of his visitors. "Windermere!" he exclaimed as servants assisted the Duke from the carriage. "Good God, man, you look positively spectral." And Lady Windermere, his keen eyes moved to Eveline, recognition dawning. "This is most unexpected. I had understood, that is to say, London gossip suggested, that we lived separate lives?" Alaric finished for him, managing a weak smile. "Gossip, my friend, is rarely the entire truth. We require your hospitality, and perhaps your support in a matter of some delicacy." Lord Keswick bowed formally to Eveline. "My home is yours, your grace, as is any assistance I might render." As they entered the grand hall, a servant approached Lord Keswick, murmuring something that caused his brow to furrow. "It appears," he said with evident discomfort, "that we have another unexpected guest. Lady Octavia Rowanford arrived not an hour ago, claiming her carriage had suffered damage on the road to Windermere." Alaric's face hardened. "No coincidence, I assure you. She is in the east drawing room," Lord Keswick continued. "Shall I make your presence known, or would you prefer discretion?" Before either Alaric or Eveline could respond, the sound of firm footsteps echoed across the marble floor. Lady Octavia appeared in the doorway to the hall, her expression transforming from practiced social charm to cold fury at the sight of the new arrivals. "So," she said, her voice cutting through the silence, "the chase continues. How tenacious you prove, Mrs. Harcourt." "Lady Windermere," Alaric corrected sharply, drawing himself up despite his weakness. "You will address my wife by her proper title, aunt, or you shall not address her at all." Lady Octavia's hand moved to the ruby ring on her finger, twisting it slowly, a gesture Eveline recognized from their previous confrontation. "Your fever clearly affects your judgment, nephew. Perhaps these letters might restore your memory." From her reticule she withdrew a small packet tied with black ribbon, holding it aloft like a weapon. "Correspondence between Arabella Wynne and your precious bride, dated mere weeks before Arabella's tragic end. Shall I read them aloud here and now?" The blood drained from Eveline's face. "That is impossible," she whispered. "I never knew Arabella Wynne." The music box, miles away at Ravenhurst, seemed to echo in her memory, a melody unheard, a truth unrevealed, waiting for the proper key to unlock its secrets. Thornfield Abbey's grand dining room, with its oak-panelled walls and ancestral portraits, seemed to hold its breath as Lady Octavia's accusation hung in the air. Lord Edward Keswick, ever the diplomat, broke the tense silence with practiced ease. "Perhaps this discussion might continue in a more private setting," he suggested, gesturing toward a side door. "My library offers both comfort and discretion." "I have nothing to hide," Lady Octavia declared, her chin raised in defiance. "Let the servants hear. Let all Yorkshire know how this woman," she jabbed a finger toward Eveline, "orchestrated her advancement through another's tragedy." Alaric stepped forward, his weakness momentarily forgotten in righteous anger. "Enough, aunt. You will present your supposed evidence in private, or not at all." Something in his tone, a ducal authority she had rarely witnessed during their brief marriage, made Eveline glance at him with new eyes. This was not the cold, distant man who had abandoned her, but someone altogether different, protective, commanding, yet tempered with an undercurrent of something that might almost be tenderness. Lord Keswick guided them to the library, a magnificent chamber where leather-bound volumes lined the walls from floor to ceiling. A fire crackled in the marble hearth, casting dancing shadows across Persian carpets. Clara positioned herself protectively beside Eveline, while Lord Keswick stood near the Duke, offering unobtrusive support should his strength fail. "Now," Alaric said, lowering himself carefully into a wing chair, "these letters you claim exist between my wife and Arabella. Produce them." Lady Octavia removed the black ribbon with theatrical slowness. "Before her death, Arabella entrusted these to me, saying they should be opened only if the baronet's daughter ever attempts to rise above her station. I have honored that request until now." She extended the first letter toward Alaric. He took it, his expression guarded, then passed it directly to Eveline without reading it. "It is addressed to you," he said simply. "The choice to share its contents is yours alone." Eveline's fingers trembled as she unfolded the parchment. The handwriting was elegant, feminine, entirely unfamiliar. "My dearest Eveline," she read aloud, her voice growing stronger with bewilderment. Though we have never met, I feel I know you through your father's fond descriptions. How strange that we should be connected through the man we both love, though in different ways." She looked up, confusion evident in her face. "This makes no sense. I never received such a letter. I had no connection to Arabella Wynne." "Continue," Lady Octavia commanded, a triumphant gleam in her eye. "Your father speaks often of your gentle spirit, your talent for music. He believes you would make Alaric a fitting wife, should I prove unsuitable. Forgive my boldness, but I write in desperation. By the time you receive this, I shall have taken a path from which there is no return. Tell him I loved him too deeply to bind him to my disgrace." Eveline's voice faltered. "This cannot be genuine. My father barely knew the Duke before our marriage arrangement, and I never received any letter from Arabella Wynne." "Of course you did not," Lady Octavia replied smoothly, "because I intercepted it, along with your reply." She produced a second letter, this one bearing what appeared to be Eveline's own signature. Alaric took it, his jaw tightening as he scanned the contents. "A forgery," he pronounced, passing it to Lord Keswick. "A poor imitation of Mrs. Harcourt's hand." Lord Keswick adjusted his spectacles, examining the document with scholarly precision. "I concur. The pressure of the pen is inconsistent, and several letters bear flourishes uncharacteristic of feminine education, a masculine hand attempting feminine delicacy." Lady Octavia's composed facade cracked slightly. "Nonsense. These letters prove that Eveline Harcourt conspired with her father to replace Arabella in your affections, perhaps even contributed to the despair that drove Arabella to her tragic end." Clara stepped forward, her literary mind quickly assembling the pieces. "A fabrication worthy of a Gothic novel, Lady Octavia. But tell me, who benefits most from this elaborate fiction? Not the Duke, whose heart was broken. Not Eveline, who endured years of unjust exile. Only you, preserving your influence over your nephew by ensuring his marriage remained empty of affection." "You overstep, Lady Ashcombe," Lady Octavia snapped, but a flicker of unease crossed her features. Alaric rose from his chair, summoning reserves of strength that surprised even himself. "There is a simple way to resolve this matter. Evelina, when did your father first approach you regarding our potential match?" Eveline straightened, certainty replacing confusion. 3 months after Arabella's death. He mentioned it as a possibility, nothing more. We were not formally introduced until 2 months later. "And I," Alaric continued, "did not agree to consider marriage until 6 months had passed. By then, these letters, dated mere days before Arabella's death, would have been irrelevant." Lady Octavia's carefully constructed narrative began to unravel visibly. Her gloved hand clutched her reticule with white-knuckled intensity. "Furthermore," Lord Keswick interjected, "I recall distinctly that Baron Harcourt was in Scotland during the weeks preceding Arabella's death. He could not have been conveying messages between her and his daughter." "These are trifling inconsistencies," Lady Octavia insisted, though her voice had lost its imperious edge. "The Assembly tomorrow will judge the evidence." "There will be no judgment," Alaric declared, "because there will be no evidence. These forgeries will not leave this room." With unexpected swiftness, he took the letters from Eveline's hands and cast them into the fire. The parchment curled and blackened, years of carefully constructed deception reduced to ash in moments. Lady Octavia lunged forward with a cry of dismay, but Lord Keswick's tall form blocked her path. "My dear lady," he said with perfect courtesy, "I believe your carriage has been repaired. My butler will show you out." "This is not the end," she hissed, her composure abandoned entirely. "Benedict has already spread the story throughout London. Your reputation is ruined, Eveline Harcourt, whether these particular letters survive or not." "Then we shall counter with truth," Alaric replied, standing with newfound steadiness. "Lord Keswick, I require a favour. Will you accompany us to Windermere Hall tomorrow? Your presence would lend considerable weight to our testimony." "I should be honoured," Lord Keswick responded with a formal bow. "And may I suggest we depart early? I have information regarding Lord Benedict Vane that may prove useful, specifically concerning certain gambling debts that might explain his eagerness to support Lady Octavia's scheme." As Lady Octavia was escorted from the library, Alaric turned to Eveline, his expression grave. "I owe you yet another apology. It seems my aunt's interference in our marriage began long before I sent you away. Did you believe them?" Eveline asked quietly. "These supposed letters, did they influence your decision to banish me?" Alaric shook his head. "No, I never saw them until today. My decision was born purely of cowardice, fear of allowing myself to care for you, lest history repeat itself. And yet," Eveline observed with newfound clarity, "history did repeat itself, not in tragedy but in isolation. Both Arabella and I suffered for loving you, albeit in different ways." The admission that she had indeed loved him, despite his coldness, hung between them like a fragile crystal, too delicate to grasp yet too precious to ignore. From the hallway came the sound of Lady Octavia's departing carriage, wheels crunching on gravel as she retreated to marshal her forces for the confrontation at Windmere Hall. The battle had begun, but the true resolution, between husband and wife, between past wounds and future possibilities, remained as unfinished as the melody of the silver music box, waiting patiently at Ravenhurst for someone brave enough to let it play to completion. In the gathering dusk, servants lit candles throughout Thornfield Abbey. Tomorrow would bring the final confrontation at Windmere Hall, where 3 years of silence would end in public declaration, for better or worse. Morning unveiled itself with tentative grace over Thornfield Abbey, pale sunlight filtering through leaded glass to cast honeyed patterns across the breakfast parlour. Eveline sat before her untouched tea, her fingers absently smoothing the midnight blue silk of her travelling gown. Across the table, Clara studied her friend's face with sisterly concern. "You have not slept," Clara observed quietly. "How could I?" Eveline replied. "Today I must face not only Lady Octavia's machinations, but the spectres of my own past humiliation, to enter Windmere Hall again, to stand before those who witnessed my disgrace, not as the banished bride," Clara reminded her gently, "but as the Duchess reclaiming her rightful position. That is no small transformation, my dear." Lord Keswick entered, his scholarly countenance enlivened by purpose. "The carriages are prepared. His Grace awaits us in the library. Much improved, I am pleased to report. A night's proper rest has worked wonders." As they traversed the corridor, Eveline steeled herself for the journey ahead. 3 years ago, she had departed Windmere Hall in a closed carriage, tears streaming down her face, the Duke's cold dismissal ringing in her ears. Today she would return with her head held high, not seeking redemption but demanding justice. The library door opened to reveal Alaric standing before the hearth, his tall figure no longer bent by weakness. Though still pale, a new vitality animated his features. He wore impeccable formal attire, a black frock coat, silver brocade waistcoat, and pristine white cravat. At Eveline's entrance he turned, his eyes widening almost imperceptibly at the sight of her in the midnight blue gown that transformed her from country exile to aristocratic presence. "You look," he began, then faltered, as if the appropriate word eluded him. "Duchess-like, I should hope," she supplied with careful neutrality. "Formidable," he corrected softly, "as befits the occasion." Lord Keswick cleared his throat. "I have prepared certain documents that may prove useful in countering Lady Octavia's claims. Financial records demonstrate Lord Benedict Vane's desperate circumstances, and several substantial payments from Lady Octavia's personal accounts to his creditors over the past month." "Excellent," Alaric nodded. "Such evidence will undermine his testimony considerably." "What of the Reverend?" Clara inquired. "Have you considered his role in today's proceedings?" "I dispatched a messenger to Ravenhurst at dawn," Lord Keswick replied. "Reverend Hale should arrive at Windmere Hall by mid-afternoon, accompanied by several respected tenants who can attest to Lady Windmere's exemplary character." Eveline felt a curious lightness at this news. Not merely allies, but friends, people whose lives she had touched during her exile, now rallying to her defence. The journey to Windmere Hall passed in tense silence. As Yorkshire hills gave way to more manicured landscapes, Eveline's apprehension mounted. When the first glimpse of Windmere's towers appeared through parting mist, her breath caught painfully in her throat. "It is much as I remember it," she murmured, half to herself. Alaric, seated opposite, studied her face. "I have barely set foot there myself these past years. India seemed preferable to empty halls and memories." The carriages turned onto the Grand Avenue, ancient oaks standing sentinel on either side like frozen guardians of the past. Ahead, Windmere Hall rose in limestone majesty, its Georgian symmetry a monument to aristocratic permanence. Smoke curled from multiple chimneys, and a steady stream of elegant conveyances approached the main entrance. Lady Octavia's assembly was already gathering. "A larger crowd than anticipated," Lord Keswick observed with concern. "It seems Lady Octavia has transformed what should have been a small family matter into a public spectacle." "So be it," Alaric replied, his jaw set with determination. "A public humiliation demands an equally public restoration." As their carriage halted before the grand entrance, footmen in Windmere livery rushed forward. Recognizing their master, they froze in momentary confusion before springing into action with renewed vigor. The heavy oak doors swung wide, and the butler emerged, his dignified features betraying fleeting surprise before composing themselves into formal welcome. "Your Grace," he intoned, bowing deeply. "We had not expected— That is, Lady Octavia indicated you remained indisposed in Yorkshire. As you can see, Grantham, I am very much present," Alaric replied, his tone brooking no further comment. "Please inform the household that the Duchess and I have returned." Eveline stepped from the carriage, her hand resting lightly on the Duke's proffered arm. Together they ascended the marble steps, each footfall echoing with significance. For Eveline, crossing that threshold represented not merely a physical return, but a reclamation of identity, the transition from exile to rightful place. The grand foyer opened before them, its marble columns and sweeping staircase unchanged since the day of her departure. Several early guests lingered by the entrance to the ballroom, their hushed conversations ceasing abruptly at the sight of the Duke and his long-absent wife. Eveline felt their stares like physical touch, but kept her gaze steady, her posture regal. A familiar figure emerged from the drawing room, Jenkins, her faithful butler from Ravenhurst, who had evidently arrived with Reverend Hale. His normally impassive face brightened at the sight of his mistress. "Your Grace," he said, bowing formally, "I have taken the liberty of bringing the item you requested." From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet pouch. Eveline accepted it with momentary confusion until her fingers recognized the shape within, the silver music box, retrieved from her dressing table at Ravenhurst. "You are most efficient, Jenkins," she murmured, oddly moved by this tangible connection to her separate life. A sudden commotion from the grand salon drew their attention. Lady Octavia's voice carried clearly, her tone sharp with command. "Absolutely not. He is not to be admitted under any circumstances." Lord Keswick raised an eyebrow. "It appears Reverend Hale has arrived, and received precisely the welcome we anticipated." Alaric straightened his shoulders. "Shall we join the fray, my lady? I believe our entrance may prove somewhat disruptive to my aunt's carefully orchestrated proceedings." For the first time that day, a genuine smile touched Eveline's lips. "By all means, Your Grace. I have waited 3 years for this particular disruption." As they approached the salon doors, Clara squeezed Eveline's hand encouragingly. "Remember," she whispered, "you are no longer the girl who left in tears. You are the woman who rebuilt her life from ashes." The footmen threw open the double doors. Conversation ceased instantly as every head turned toward the unexpected arrivals. The salon, resplendent with crystal chandeliers and silk-covered walls, held at least 60 of London's most influential society members. At the far end, Lady Octavia stood frozen mid-gesture, her face a study in thwarted ambition. Beside her, Lord Benedict Vane paled visibly, his fashionable countenance contorting with undisguised alarm. And between them, appearing rather bewildered by the sudden silence, stood Reverend Nathan Hale, his humble clerical attire a stark contrast to the opulent surroundings. Alaric's voice, clear and commanding, broke the stunned silence. "Good afternoon, Lady Octavia. I believe you are addressing my wife's spiritual advisor. How fortunate that we should arrive in time to make proper introductions." The music box rested in Eveline's pocket like a talisman, its melody still unheard, as she prepared to face the assembly that had gathered to witness her downfall, but would instead behold her triumph. A heartbeat of stunned silence preceded the wave of whispers that swept through Winmere's grand salon like autumn wind through fallen leaves. Lady Octavia recovered first, her patrician features arranging themselves into a simulacrum of delight. "Alaric, my dear boy," she exclaimed, advancing with outstretched hands. "What a miraculous recovery! We had such dreadful reports of your condition." "Indeed," the Duke replied coolly, making no move to accept her gesture. "It seems information regarding my household is frequently distorted in transmission, a pattern I intend to correct today." His gaze moved deliberately to Lord Benedict Vane, who shifted uncomfortably under the scrutiny. Benedict's fashionable appearance, from his exquisitely tailored coat to his artfully arranged golden hair, suddenly seemed a flimsy facade concealing a fundamentally weak character. "Cousin," Benedict offered with a weak smile, "how unexpected." "Spare me your false welcome," Alaric interrupted. "I understand you have been most creative in your descriptions of my wife's conduct at Ravenhurst." A nervous titter ran through the assembled guests. Eveline maintained perfect composure, though her heart thundered against her ribs. These were the elite of London society, the very people who had witnessed her humiliation 3 years prior, who had whispered behind fans and in gentlemen's clubs about the discarded Duchess. Now they would bear witness to her vindication. Lady Octavia's voice cut through the murmurs. "Perhaps we might continue this family discussion in private, nephew. Our guests have assembled for a pleasant afternoon, not a domestic quarrel." "On the contrary," Lord Keswick interjected smoothly, stepping forward with the confidence of a man secure in both birth and intellect. I believe your invitation specifically mentioned matters concerning the Duchess of Windermere's moral standing. As her status affects the Windermere name, surely all interested parties should remain. Eveline caught the flicker of calculation in Lady Octavia's eyes, weighing options, recalibrating strategy. The older woman had not anticipated this direct confrontation. She had expected to present her case to a sympathetic audience, with neither the Duke nor his wife present to counter her claims. As you wish, Lady Octavia conceded with brittle dignity. Turning to the assembly, she raised her voice. My friends, as many of you are aware, a most unfortunate situation has developed regarding my nephew's marriage. For years, we have maintained discreet silence about the irregularities that necessitated Lady Windermere's retirement to Yorkshire. However, recent developments compel me to seek your counsel. She gestured toward Reverend Hale, who stood uncomfortably at the periphery. This young clergyman has spent an inordinate amount of time in private consultation with a woman living essentially as a widow. The proprieties have been, shall we say, liberally interpreted. Nathan Hale stepped forward, his honest face flushed with indignation. I protest most strongly, madam. My visits to Ravenhurst Manor were entirely in keeping with my pastoral duties. Mrs. Langford was present for all our meetings and Mrs. Langford, Lady Octavia interrupted with a dismissive wave, is a servant, dependent upon Mrs. Harcourt's goodwill, hardly an impartial chaperone. Alaric's voice cut through the charged atmosphere. You will address my wife by her proper title, Lady Octavia. She is the Duchess of Windermere and has remained so continuously since our marriage. A murmur rippled through the assembly. Lady Octavia's expression hardened. A marriage in name only, as you well know. You yourself declared it a mere formality, a duty fulfilled without sentiment. You sent her from this house without ceremony or explanation. For 3 years, she has lived as no duchess should, managing estates, giving orders, receiving gentlemen callers without proper supervision. I did indeed send her away, Alaric acknowledged, his voice carrying to every corner of the salon. It was the greatest mistake of my life, born not of any failing on her part, but of my own cowardice. The admission, spoken without reservation before the assembled elite, created a momentary vacuum of sound. Even the rustle of silk gowns and the clink of teacups stilled as society collectively held its breath. Eveline felt Clara's supportive presence at her side, heard Lord Keswick's soft murmur of approval. Yet she remained focused on her husband's face, witnessing a transformation more profound than his physical recovery, a stripping away of aristocratic reserve to reveal raw, genuine emotion. I married Eveline Harcourt, believing myself incapable of sentiment, Alaric continued, his gaze now fixed upon his wife rather than the audience. When I discovered this assumption to be false, when I found myself drawn to her gentle spirit and quiet dignity, I reacted with fear rather than courage. I sent away the very person who might have healed the wounds of my past. Lady Octavia's composure cracked visibly. This is most unseemly, Alaric. Such personal confessions are long overdue, he finished firmly. For too long, this family has equated coldness with strength, distance with propriety. You taught me well, Aunt, too well. But in India, facing my own mortality, I recognized the hollowness of such lessons. He turned back to the assembly, his stance that of a man reclaiming not merely his household, but his very identity. 3 days ago, I crossed England, despite severe illness, to beg my wife's forgiveness and return. She received me with a grace I scarcely deserved, nursing me back to health despite the wounds I had inflicted upon her heart. Lord Benedict Vane, sensing the shifting tide, attempted retreat toward a side door. Lord Keswick's tall figure smoothly intercepted him. Leaving so soon, Lord Vane? He inquired with deceptive mildness. Before you explain your remarkable ability to witness improprieties at Ravenhurst, a place you have never visited. That is, certain reliable sources, Benedict stammered. Lord Keswick produced a sheaf of documents from his coat. Would these reliable sources perhaps be connected to the substantial payments from Lady Octavia's personal accounts to your creditors? Payments that coincide rather precisely with your sudden interest in the Duchess's moral conduct. A collective gasp rippled through the salon. Lady Octavia's face blanched, then flushed with fury. This is outrageous. You dare to imply— I imply nothing, Lord Keswick replied calmly. I merely present facts. Lord Benedict's gambling debts total nearly £12,000, a sum mysteriously resolved last month through anonymous benefaction. Benedict wilted under the collective scrutiny. It was merely a loan, he protested feebly. Octavia suggested that in exchange for certain testimonies— Enough! Lady Octavia's voice cracked like a whip. You weak-willed fool! Eveline stepped forward, her quiet voice somehow commanding attention without strain. "I have remained silent until now, believing my actions would speak more eloquently than any defense. For 3 years, I have managed Ravenhurst Manor with honesty and dignity. I have cared for tenants, improved lands, and conducted myself as befits a woman of responsibility, if not of title." Her gaze swept the assembled faces, recognizing several who had once whispered behind her back at her wedding breakfast. "I never sought to undermine the Windermere name or position. Indeed, I preserved it in the only way permitted me, through quiet dignity and useful purpose." She turned to Lady Octavia, meeting the older woman's venomous glare without flinching. "You have painted me as a schemer, a temptress, even a madwoman. Yet which of us has forged letters? Which has purchased false testimony? Which has built a fortress of lies to protect not family honor, but personal power?" A hush fell over the salon. Even Lady Octavia seemed momentarily bereft of response, her fingers twisting her ruby ring with such violence that the stone caught the light like trapped flame. Reverend Hale moved to Eveline's side, his honest face animated with righteous purpose. "I can attest before God and this assembly that Lady Windermere has conducted herself with impeccable honor. Her charity toward the parish, her wisdom in managing difficult tenants, her personal kindness to the sick and elderly, these are not the actions of a woman of questionable character." From the doorway came the sound of multiple footsteps. Mrs. Langford entered, followed by Jenkins and several well-dressed Yorkshire farmers, the Ravenhurst tenants, come to support their mistress. Their sturdy presence, so at odds with the ornate surroundings, nevertheless carried its own authority, the weight of honest work and genuine respect. The silver music box pressed against Eveline's side, still silent, yet somehow more present than ever before. As if sensing its proximity, Alaric extended his hand toward his wife. "For 3 years, I silenced the music between us," he said softly, though his words carried in the hushed room. "Today, I ask permission to hear it anew." The grand salon of Windermere Hall, so recently fraught with tension, had transformed in the space of an hour. Lady Octavia, her schemes exposed before society, had retreated to her chambers with claims of sudden migraine. Lord Benedict Vane, thoroughly discredited, had slipped away amid pointed whispers and averted gazes. The assembly, intended as Eveline's public condemnation, had instead become a curious blend of impromptu homecoming and social rehabilitation. Clusters of elegantly dressed guests now approached the Duke and Duchess with effusive greetings, as if the 3-year separation had been a mere extended holiday rather than a scandalous banishment. Eveline accepted their sudden warmth with gracious reserve, neither reminding them of past slights nor permitting undue familiarity. She had not forgotten how quickly these same smiling faces had turned from her in her hour of need. "Remarkable recovery," Lord Keswick murmured, observing the social ballet from beside a marble column. "London society possesses an extraordinary capacity for collective amnesia when the wind changes direction." Clara nodded, sipping tea beside him. "They follow power like sunflowers tracking light. Yesterday, Lady Octavia represented the Windermere influence. Today, it is clearly the Duke and his restored Duchess." Across the room, Alaric conducted himself with newfound assurance. No longer the cold aristocrat nor the fevered penitent, but a man who had faced his demons and emerged stronger for the confrontation. His hazel eyes frequently sought Eveline's amid the crowd, as if to anchor himself in her presence. A distinguished matron in plum silk approached Eveline, her heavily ringed fingers extended in greeting. "My dear Lady Windermere, how delightful to see you restored to your proper place. I always said the separation was most irregular." "Did you indeed, Lady Harrington?" Eveline replied with perfect composure. How curious that such sentiments never reached Ravenhurst. The woman coloured slightly, but persisted. "One hesitates to interfere in marital matters, of course. But tell me, shall you remain at Windermere now, or do you prefer your rustic retreat?" Before Eveline could respond, Mrs. Langford appeared at her elbow. "Forgive the interruption, Your Grace, but the housekeeper requires instruction regarding your chambers. They have been somewhat neglected in your absence." Grateful for the reprieve, Eveline excused herself. As she followed Mrs. Langford from the salon, she felt rather than saw Alaric disengage from his conversation to join her. Together they climbed the grand staircase, their footsteps synchronized on marble steps that had once witnessed her tearful departure. "You need not accompany me for household matters," she said quietly. "Your guests are neither as important nor as interesting as my wife's first moments back in her home," he replied simply. The word home lingered between them, a concept more complex than the magnificent structure surrounding them. For Eveline, home had become the modest comforts of Ravenhurst. For Alaric, it had been an absence, a void filled with duty and distance. The Duchess's chambers occupied the east wing, catching morning light through tall windows that overlooked formal gardens. When the double doors swung open, Eveline paused at the threshold, momentarily disoriented. The rooms remained exactly as she had left them 3 years prior, her brushes arranged on the vanity, her favorite books on the bedside table, even the embroidery frame with its half-finished garden scene positioned by the window. "I gave orders that nothing be removed or altered," Alaric explained, noting her surprise. "At first it was simply easier than deciding what to do with your possessions. Later it became a shrine of sorts, a memorial to my mistake." Mrs. Langford discreetly withdrew, leaving them alone in the preserved tableau of their abbreviated marriage. Eveline moved through the sitting room, touching familiar objects with wandering fingers, tangible connections to the young, hopeful bride she had been, now encountered by the self-possessed woman she had become. "It feels like visiting a museum dedicated to a stranger," she observed, pausing before the vanity mirror that reflected a face subtly transformed by experience. "Not a stranger," Alaric corrected gently. "Simply an earlier chapter of yourself. As I am an earlier version of the man standing before you." From her pocket, Eveline withdrew the silver music box, placing it on the marble-topped table between them. The afternoon sunlight caught its tarnished surface, highlighting delicate engravings nearly forgotten by both. "You never heard its melody," she said, her voice soft with memory. "Nor you," he replied. "I interrupted its first playing, and it has remained silent since." His fingers hovered near the small key, not quite touching it, a question rather than a presumption. Eveline hesitated, then nodded slightly. Alaric turned the key with deliberate care, winding the mechanism fully before releasing the clasp that held the lid closed. The melody emerged hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence, a simple tune rendered profound by circumstance. Neither spoke as the notes filled the chamber, each lost in private reflection upon all that had transpired since the music was last silenced. "What happens now?" Eveline asked, when the final note faded. "Society has witnessed our reconciliation. Lady Octavia is temporarily subdued and your fever has broken. The immediate crisis has passed." Alaric considered her question with the gravity it deserved. "In practical terms, certain arrangements must be formalized. Ravenhurst shall remain under your management. You have proven yourself more than capable, and the tenants clearly flourish under your guidance." "And beyond practicalities," she prompted, her grey-blue eyes meeting his directly. "Beyond practicalities lies the more difficult path," he acknowledged, "rebuilding trust, discovering if what remains between us is worth preserving and nurturing. I would not presume that a public declaration erases private wounds." Eveline moved to the window, gazing out at gardens beginning to glow with late afternoon light. Below, a gardener's boy moved methodically along the gravel paths, lighting lanterns that would illuminate the grounds as evening approached. "When you came to Ravenhurst," she said without turning, "you spoke of crossing England to beg my return. Yet since your arrival, you have offered explanations, apologies, even public vindication, but never actually made that request." Behind her, Alaric's reflection appeared in the window glass, his tall figure haloed by sunlight. "Because I realized, somewhere between fever and clarity, that it was not my place to ask you to return to a home you never truly possessed. Instead, I must ask permission to enter the life you have built without me, and hope I might in time earn a place within it." The simple humility of his statement, so at odds with the aristocratic privilege that had once defined him, touched something deep within Eveline's carefully guarded heart. She turned to face him directly. "I cannot simply forget the past," she said honestly. "The young woman who left here in tears no longer exists. The one who stands before you now has learned to value herself beyond titles or others' approval." "I would not wish her return," Alaric replied. "It is the woman you have become, independent, compassionate, resilient, whom I crossed England to find." A knock at the door interrupted their exchange. Jenkins entered with formal decorum. "Forgive the intrusion, your graces, but Lord Keswick suggested you might wish to know that Lady Octavia has been observed departing the premises with considerable haste, and taking certain documents from his grace's study." Alaric frowned. "What documents?" "I believe they pertain to the Ravenhurst estate, sir. The deeds and financial papers." Eveline and Alaric exchanged concerned glances. "She means to strike at Ravenhurst directly," Eveline realized. "If she cannot discredit me socially, she will attempt to undermine my position there legally. Then we must act quickly," Alaric decided. "Jenkins, Have the carriage prepared. Lord Keswick's legal knowledge will be invaluable. Ask him to accompany us. We depart for London within the hour. London, Eveline echoed. The original deeds are held by the family solicitor. We must secure them before Octavia can implement whatever scheme she has devised. His eyes met hers, seeking confirmation. Will you come? This battle concerns your home as much as mine. The silver music box sat between them, its melody complete, yet lingering in memory. Eveline recognized the moment for what it was, not merely a practical decision about legal documents, but a first step toward genuine partnership. Yes, she replied simply. Ravenhurst is worth defending, as is the life I have built there. As twilight settled over Windermere Hall, the Duke and Duchess departed not in separate directions but together, bound for London and whatever challenges awaited. The music box travelled with them, its song finally heard in full, its purpose transformed from rejected offering to shared memory. In the growing darkness, lanterns bloomed like earthbound stars along the carriageway, lighting a path forward that neither could have anticipated when dawn broke that morning. Spring had come at last to Ravenhurst Manor. 6 months had passed since the confrontation at Windermere Hall. 6 months of careful reconstruction, not merely of legal documents and social standing, but of something far more fragile, trust between two souls, long accustomed to solitude. The gardens bloomed with renewed vigor beneath an April sky of perfect cerulean. Eveline moved among newly awakened flower beds, her lavender gown contrasting with vibrant greenery as she guided Mrs. Wilson's youngest daughter in planting the season's first violets. Gently, Emma, she instructed, demonstrating how to settle the delicate roots without damaging them. All living things require patience and proper care to flourish. From the terrace, Alaric observed the scene with quiet appreciation. London's legal battles had concluded 3 months prior with Lady Octavia's decisive defeat. The forged documents she had attempted to submit to the family solicitor had only cemented her disgrace. Now she lived in relative exile at a small estate in Scotland, her influence thoroughly diminished, though Alaric had ensured she maintained comfort appropriate to her station. Cruelty, even justified, had no place in the new foundation he sought to build. Lord Benedict Vane had fared less well. His creditors, no longer placated by Lady Octavia's funds, had pursued their claims vigorously. Last reports placed him on a merchant vessel bound for the Americas, fleeing both financial ruin and social ostracism. These victories, while necessary, paled against the quieter triumph unfolding daily between husband and wife. Alaric descended the stone steps to join Eveline in the garden, careful not to disturb the serious work of flower planting. Little Emma, upon noticing the Duke's approach, executed a wobbly curtsy before scampering off to show her mother their accomplishments. "So you've quite won her loyalty," Alaric observed, offering Eveline his handkerchief for her soil-dusted fingers. "Children recognize sincerity more readily than adults," she replied, accepting the cloth with a small smile. "They have not yet learned to disguise their true feelings beneath social niceties, a wisdom we might all benefit from," he agreed, offering his arm for a turn about the garden path. They walked in companionable silence, their steps synchronized through months of practice. Though Windermere Hall remained their official residence, duty to the title required regular presence there, Ravenhurst had become their true home. Here, away from society's constant scrutiny, they had begun the delicate process of discovering one another as equals. "Reverend Hale's sermon this morning was most thought-provoking," Eveline remarked, as they approached a stone bench positioned to catch the afternoon sun. His meditation on forgiveness as an ongoing practice rather than a single act. "Indeed." Alaric helped her settle on the bench before joining her. "I found myself reflecting upon how forgiveness requires participation from both parties, one to offer it certainly, but also one willing to continually earn it through changed behavior. "You have earned much," Eveline said softly, her gaze fixed upon distant hills. Alaric's hand found hers, a gesture that had grown more natural with passing weeks. "Not nearly enough, but I shall endeavour to continue the practice daily." From the manor house, Mrs. Langford emerged onto the terrace waving a letter. "Your Grace, express from London. It bears Lord Keswick's seal." Alaric rose to accept the missive, breaking the seal with interest. His expression brightened as he scanned the contents. "Edward writes that the Ravenhurst School Foundation has received official recognition. The trustees have approved funding for 2 additional classrooms and a proper library." Eveline's face illuminated with genuine pleasure. The school, educating tenant children and village orphans alike, had been her vision, but Alaric had championed it through London's bureaucracy, leveraging his title to secure necessary permissions and financial support. "This calls for celebration," she declared, rising with uncharacteristic impulsiveness. "We must inform Reverend Hale immediately. He has worked tirelessly to secure suitable teachers." Alaric smiled at her enthusiasm, recognizing how far they had traveled from the wounded souls who had confronted each other in Ravenhurst's Blue Chamber 6 months earlier. The journey toward wholeness, both individual and shared, continued daily, marked not by grand gestures but by 1,000 small choices to remain present, honest and engaged. As twilight approached, they retired to the library, where a small fire combated the lingering chill of early spring. Clara's latest novel lay open on the side table, her literary star having risen considerably since her passionate defense of Eveline had caught the attention of a prominent publisher. Mrs. Langford served tea with practiced efficiency before discreetly withdrawing, leaving husband and wife to the comfortable routine they had established. "I had a letter from my steward at Windermere this morning," Alaric mentioned, accepting his cup. "The East Wing renovations are complete. We might visit next month if you are amenable." Eveline nodded thoughtfully. "I should like to see the changes, and perhaps continue on to London afterward. The season will be underway, and while I have little appetite for endless social engagements, there are certain causes that might benefit from aristocratic patronage. The Children's Hospital?" Alaric guessed, familiar with her recent interests. "Among others." She hesitated briefly. "I have been corresponding with several women of influence regarding educational opportunities for girls beyond basic schooling. Lady Pembroke has offered her ballroom for an informational assembly." Alaric regarded her with evident pride. "From exiled wife to social reformer, a transformation I observe with deepest admiration. You shall have my full support, of course." "As you have had mine with the tenants' agricultural improvements," she acknowledged. "It seems we make more effective allies than adversaries." From her pocket, Eveline withdrew the silver music box, now a constant companion rather than a painful reminder. Over months it had transformed from symbol of rejection to emblem of renewal. She placed it upon the table between them and opened the lid without winding the mechanism, allowing comfortable silence to prevail. "I have been contemplating," Alaric said after a thoughtful pause, "what lesson might be drawn from our particular journey? What moral, if you will, underlies our story? And what conclusion have you reached?" Eveline inquired, genuine curiosity warming her tone. "That pride may wound more deeply than hatred, and silence injure more lastingly than harsh words." His eyes, once cold with aristocratic reserve, now held warmth and self-awareness. "And perhaps most importantly, that it is never too late to humble oneself before genuine worth." Eveline considered his words, finding them resonant with her own reflections. "I might add that dignity sustained in solitude will eventually find recognition if one remains true to one's principles, and that forgiveness, while never owed, may prove the most liberating choice of all." Alaric reached across the space between them, his fingers gently turning the small key of the music box. As the melody filled the library, no longer interrupted, no longer feared, he extended his other hand toward his wife. "May I request the honor of a dance, Your Grace?" Eveline placed her hand in his, rising with graceful dignity. "You may, Your Grace." In the firelit library of Ravenhurst Manor, the Duke and Duchess of Windermere danced to the simple tune that had once symbolized their separation. Now it accompanied their careful, deliberate movements toward a future neither could have imagined during those years of silence. A future built not upon duty or title, but upon hard-won understanding and freely given respect. The silver music box played its melody to completion, uninterrupted at last. True nobility lies not in titles or social position, but in the courage to acknowledge one's failings and seek redemption through changed behavior. Pride may shatter what love might heal, and dignity maintained through adversity will eventually find its rightful recognition. Even the deepest wounds can be mended when both parties approach reconciliation with honesty, humility, and perseverance. The most profound transformations often begin with a single act of courage, whether crossing a country to beg forgiveness or standing firm in the face of slander. When we replace silence with truth and coldness with compassion, even broken hearts may find their way to wholeness again. Have you ever longed to be transported to an era of grand estates, complex social hierarchies, and passionate emotions veiled beneath proper decorum? Join us for more captivating historical romances that explore how love transcends societal constraints, heals wounded hearts, and ultimately triumphs over pride and misunderstanding. Subscribe now for exclusive access to stories of duchesses finding their voice, dukes discovering their humanity, and love reclaiming lives once thought beyond redemption. Let the echoes of the past inspire your present, one page-turning romance at a time.